So the purpose behind our diagnostics through planning modules is part of our implied workflow. We talked a little bit in our 100 class, in our 101 class, on how SuiteCX has sort of a workflow as part of its navigation. And the idea here is just a reminder on what our workflow looks like. I'll click over to one of our trial projects. You've got your VOC tabs, our VOE, VOI, CX finding, recommendation, prioritize, initiatives, and roadmap. So what this is showing you is most of you are working in the CX tab. So we spent our 100 level course and our 101 level course going deep into journey mapping and how we build journey maps and why we do that and what eye points are and how we append data and all that, how we create maps and how we print them, etc. So what we like to recommend as a practice is we like to recommend that you do surveys. And the surveys that we usually work with are voice of customer, voice of employee, and voice of institution. The purpose is so that you get sort of a 360 view of what's going on in your company so that you're not just totally biased about what the customer says or only what your employees say or only what your leadership says. This is the purpose. So we've just built in a methodology to bring in the results of a survey. So we do not execute surveys from SuiteCX. We just pull them in after they've been executed. And I know that all of you on the phone, you're probably already working in some way with surveys. Voice of customer is the most popular, so you probably already have something in place. What I'd like to do, instead of teaching you how to create a survey, because I believe you probably already know how to do that, what I'd like to do is just show you something that we have that I think is interesting and might be useful to you at some point. So we have basically a database full of questions, and I'm sorry, I did mute you all because I heard some feedback. So if you're talking and I'm not responding, just use the chat box and I'll take everyone off mute. So this is our voice of customer, voice of institution, and voice of employee survey database. And what we've done here is we've created sort of our preferred question set covering a variety of different categories and topics. So how might you use this or why would you care? This is kind of cool. Number one, if you don't have maybe you have a VOC survey that you already use as a company, but maybe you don't have a VOI or a VOE. Well, feel free to tap into our database of questions. So we'd be happy to work with you. We can share this library of questions, and you might find some questions here that are really useful and that would help fit your company. What we generally do when we work with a company on these surveys is we just customize these questions to have the type of language that they're used to speaking as a company. So that's really easy to do. What is cool about this is we've not only put together the survey questions with a scale for the answers, but we've created an associated findings. So the way that this works, findings and recommendations, for every survey question that we have a associated finding depending on the score received. So for example, this first survey question is under the category called emotional. And it says here, the survey question, let's do this one really easy. I have a feeling that I really understand the company or the brand. And this is something you're asking the customer. If they score a 0 to 0.99, what that means as a finding is they have no understanding of our brand. As an associated recommendation, that means we've got some work to do. So what we do in that case, and I'll highlight the associated recommendation, is we say, okay, if you do not have a program to build customer understanding, let's start it right now. This is critical. Same thing with if they answer the question a little bit better. Let's say okay, I have a little understanding of your brand. Okay, then our next finding or recommendation would be, okay, let's build strengths in customer understanding and ensure that it resonates with the customer. So let's build on what we've got. And then a finding for, I have some understanding, Maybe an associated recommendation for that would be continue efforts to build on the customer's understanding. Same thing with if they answered at the highest level, they said, I really understand this company or brand. This really resonates with me. Well, then great. What that means is keep doing what you're doing. You're doing something great, but at least understand what you're doing so that you don't deviate from that. So this is just a way that we do our surveys. We always set up the findings and recommendations ahead of time based on the scores that customers could give for each question. Other than that, I don't think this is terribly different from what you're probably already doing today. How that plays into the software is when we bring in our survey results, we also bring in the associated findings and recommendations based on the scores that we received. That gives us our way forward. And then we pull those recommendations into our planning pieces of the tool. And then we treat those as projects. So basically everything that if our customers scored, kind of low on average, then we would have a whole lot of recommendations coming forward talking about how we need to build more of a branding recognition program. We need to do this, we need to do that. Then you know where your priorities are and you know how to actually take action to make sure those things happen. This is sort of our philosophy. And we follow the same philosophy across the Voice of Employee survey. So it's the same thing. We ask our employees certain questions across different categories. Depending on how they answer, we have an associated finding and an associated recommendation. Same thing with our leadership. When we do a VOI survey, we ask questions, we have associated findings and recommendations. So I just want to kind of really emphasize that point because that'll help you understand the planning features. So a little bit now on designing surveys. I'm not going to go into this. This is not super important. This is a lot around just survey scales. You guys already know how to make survey scales. The one note I'll say here is that if you have an existing survey, we're going to need to commonize the scale before we bring it into SuiteCX. Our software is set up to pull questions in for one scale only. So we generally use a 0 to 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, so that would be 4 answers. If you have like a 1 to 9 or a 0 to 9 or a 1 to 10 or something like that, we would have to convert that into like a 0 to 4 or 0 to 3. Or we could just do 0 to 9. Whatever it is, we have to just pick a scale and stick with it, is my point. So just a little review on SuiteCX navigation so you know how to get to these parts of the tool and how to find them and how to move through them. So when you're looking across the navigation here, the sub-navigation, let's call it, this is where you're going to find all these sort of planning, diagnostics, and planning capabilities. All I did here was click on VOC. Now I'm working in a project that's been treated like a sample project, so I already have data loaded. So we'll show you later how to read these charts. It's pretty easy once you get used to it. Now in the footer, you'll have as many pages as necessary depending on how big your survey is. In this case, we just have like a page and a half. We have a place for customer verbatims, which you would load separately. Quotes or insights or anything that you want to capture, even maybe something that was through a verbal listening communication. Then we have a Freeform graphing tool, which allows you to just take any data that you have that maybe doesn't fit into the survey scale, but that you still think is relevant or important. So you can just treat this like you would treat Excel. You're just going to load the data in here. And then we automatically create this maturity model. I showed you this maturity model earlier in our high-level overview in the 100-level course. We're not married to it. If you don't love it, it doesn't matter. We can redesign it. This is just simply pulling through the results of all the data across your surveys and then comparing it to an industry benchmark. So don't worry too much about the way that looks. A little bit of a note here about the footer buttons. So we do have functionality in our footer throughout all these different diagnostics and planning modules, and it varies depending on the screen you're on. So I just showed you how to click through the footer on this module, but if I click on findings, I'll have some different things in the footer. So we'll get to that. We'll talk about each one of these. Just want you to know to pay attention to the footer as it's unique depending on the screen that you're on. Okay, so we have a method by which you can import your survey results into the software. And our method is relatively flexible where you can work in a couple different ways. So what I'm going to do is click on VOC. And then first off, what I'm looking at here is the results of my survey. If I want to actually look at how I would put the survey in, I'm just going to click Edit in the footer. This will bring me through to a 9-step process where we just take the survey components and break them into very small pieces. And then we show you how to get that information into the software. I'll be working today with some sample data so you can see the way that I do it. And I'd be more than happy to share my sample files with the whole group who came to the call today. So we'll get into this 9-step process momentarily. We're actually going to go through every step together. So we'll get to that. Understanding findings. So the finding is just a high point or a low point that was found in your survey results. And once you've got your findings loaded in, they will appear under what's called the findings report. If you click on findings in your instance, then you will see the associated findings here. And this will just be a multi-page report, and it'll be categorized by where the finding came from. So if the finding came from your voice of customer survey, it'll say VOC, and then the category of that survey. So this was questions that you asked around value propositions from your voice of customer survey. And then there's a question in the chat box. Findings can only be associated with skilled questions. Nope, you can do findings in other ways too. That's a great question. So we can load findings up completely independently of surveys. So if you have a workshop and you come up with a whole list of findings, and then that's perfectly fine. We can bypass the survey module and we can upload the findings directly into the tool. Also, and this is a method that we do recommend, you can add findings to interaction points. So if I go to my inventory, my iPoint library, and here I have the full library of interaction points for my project, within each one of these, I have a place where I can load findings and recommendations. So this would be an opportunity to create a category, if there isn't already one that fits, document your finding, create an associated recommendation, and then we can also do a scoring here. A range from 0 to 4. 4 is the best, 0 is the least. I would say 4 is most important, 0 is least important. And then click Save. Now when you go to your findings report, you will find towards the end of the report, any findings that you loaded into iPoints will be here at the very end. And here's the one we just found. It was under value propositions because that's the category we gave it. And we gave it a score of 4. And the finding was didn't follow the program correctly. And here's the iPoint ID so that you know which iPoint that finding is associated with. So if I didn't load any survey results and all I did was load findings into my iPoints, I would still have a really nice findings report. And it would be organized by how I categorize the finding in the interaction point. So hopefully that answers that question. And I think that's a good way to work, by the way. Okay, so recommendations. Recommendations work the same way. The recommendations will live in their own report. So if I click on recommend at the sub-navigation at the top, I'll see my recommendations report. These will be categorized very similarly if you're loading your findings and recommendations connected to each other. So if I have a survey question that has an associated finding and recommendation, then I'll be able to connect those. So up at the top, I have VOC, which means this came from my voice of customer survey. This was part of the category called, this is related to the questions that I asked around value propositions. And depending on the average aggregate score per audience, this was my associated recommendation. So this is how you can track from the one to the other. Same with iPoints. So if I go to the last page, here's the recommendation that we had loaded into this one iPoint called Targeted Help in our iPoint inventory. And the recommendation here is let's review the program rules and get this person back on track. Okay, good. Now another chat. Are findings and recommendations reported at the project level, or can you download findings recs across all projects? Good question. So findings and recommendations are generally at the project level, and also that applies to our survey results. So we can only have one set of survey results per project. You can refresh it, you can change it, but you can only have one. So you could have one VOC, one VOE, and one VOI per project. Now, same with findings and recommendations. You'll have one library of findings and one library of recommendations per project. Now, you can export them out of the tool. So you can take all your findings and recommendations. You could like log into different projects and export your findings and recommendations out, and then create one master list of findings and recommendations if you wanted to. And then you could even create a brand new project that just summarizes all the findings and recommendations by doing that. So that would be how we would sort of combine if we needed to. For now, they're separate, but if you had teams working like in small groups, but they were all sort of simulating important findings and recommendations, and then you thought, okay, maybe every quarter we pull these all together and look at them as one, then I would do that through our Excel exports, and then I would re-upload them into a new project. Hopefully that answers that question. Let me see where I am. Maybe I should take you off mute. I'll take you guys off mute in a minute. So verbatims. Verbatims are simple. This is really easy. These are just the text responses that you got maybe during an interview or through open-ended questions in your survey. We don't really have rules around what's a verbatim. A verbatim is what you want it to be. We basically suggest that verbatims highlight a problem, a benefit, or a rational emotional state specifically provided by the survey respondents, and we allow up to 5 pages of verbatims per survey. And then here's our Graph-It tool. This is where we work in sort of an Excel environment. When you go to the Graph-It screen and you get to that step in the edit, you'll just see it works just like Excel. You just sort of plug in your titles and you plug in your data. And then the maturity modeling. So this is just an analysis of what the survey data is showing. And what it does is it compares the survey aggregate average score to the industry score or benchmark. And we'll talk about benchmarks in our next section. And then it compares the industry benchmark with the survey question category mean to create a gap analysis. So like I said, we didn't really super design this. We kind of threw it out there as a placeholder, and we haven't really had a ton of feedback on it. So if you could think of a better way we could show this data, we'd be more than happy to work with you on that. So I'm going to keep plowing through because my guess is that after this section, some of the questions you might have right now are going to be answered, but do keep them coming in the chat box. And then once I'm done with this section, I'll take us off mute and we can just discuss what we're looking at. So just like we have in other parts of our tool, we offer 3 ways to work. And the first way is to work with online forms or to automate. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to click on VOC. And now I'm in edit mode. If I'm in view mode, I see the results of my survey, but I'm in edit mode right now. So what you see over on the left is in green. What this means is I want to just type my data into the online form. And if you're working that way, we have little tool tips. Basically, the lessons I'm teaching right now are embedded right here in the application. So if you're working and you're like, wait, what does she mean by scale? You can click on this and this will take you right back to part of our lesson, which is just giving you a suggestion on how you could organize your scale. In most cases, we do a range of 0 to 3 or 0 to 4. The levels, same thing, there's a little tutorial here. Working in online forms is good. However, you cannot always work in online forms. There are certain steps that require a upload. So for that reason, I tend to do all of my work via upload. So we'll get to that in a second. Now the blue section allows you to just pull through some template models that we've put together that you can then modify. So if you're not really sure, you don't really have anything set up yet, you don't know exactly what type of skill you want to use or template, you could just kind of pull through our template one and then change it. The upload CSV file, this is the one that I tend to use. This is where you can download a CSV template. You can modify it offline, and then you can upload it. This also comes with user instructions and sample data. So I will show you what this looks like. So for step one, I have a file here, and you can see it's really simple. And this is the equivalent of the information that is being asked on this step in the Working Online form. So the first thing is, what is your survey response scale? I'm going to say it's 0 to 4. How many levels do you have? Well, 0 to 4 is 5, so I have 5 levels. And how would you label your levels? So I would label them from weak to foundational, average, strong, exceptional, etc. So this is what my file looks like. Then I just take this file, I choose a file, I upload it, it will replace this data, and that's how I like to work. Step 2, same thing. Basically, I have a step 2 already formatted separately, and this will just give me my survey categories. So basically, all the questions that I ask in my survey are grouped into these survey categories. So this is what they look like, and this is how I upload them. I will share all these files with you after the course. Step 3 is your opportunity to describe the audience for your survey. So we offer 4 audiences, and then we have a 5th, which is the industry benchmark. So you don't have to use 4 audiences, you can just use 1 and then use the industry benchmark, or you can use 2 or whatever you want. In this particular example, we're going by region, so we have an East, a Mid, and a West region who we ask these questions to, and then we have our label for our industry benchmark. So this is pretty simple. Step 4 is where we got a little too smart for ourselves, in my opinion. Step 4 is where you can specify removing outliers. And you might be wondering, can I use a combination of forms and file uploads? Yes, you can. There's certain steps that you have to use an upload for, but you can, in most cases, use a little bit of both, and you'll see your work being saved, so you'll know if you're accomplishing what you need to accomplish. So what we've done here is we created a default scoring rule. So you can basically say, I want to remove any findings that are either higher than a certain number or lower than a certain number. I don't do that. I like to show all first, at least the first time through. I want to see everything. If I need to go back and make some adjustments later, you can always come back later and update this scoring range to exclude certain findings that you believe are outliers, because I don't know for sure if they're really outliers right out the gate. I wouldn't assume that anything that's really high or anything that's really low is an outlier. That's my personal opinion. So I like to pull everything through, evaluate it, and then decide later. And usually I keep everything. So in order to keep everything, if you're working on a 0 to 4 scale, this is how you would set up your file. And again, I'll share this with you guys so that you can fiddle with the files that I have and see how it uploads for you. Step 5 is your benchmarks. So let me pull that one up. So what we have here is we have benchmarks used to compare your survey results to what experts say is standard or best practice. You can use them to compare survey results to your own assumptions too. So we have some industry benchmark sort of template in here, data. We've got industry benchmarks by retail, hospitality, telecommunications, consumer products, banking, insurance, manufacturing, technology, and professional services. In this example, we're using professional services. So what I've loaded for my file is across the categories that are associated with my survey, I have a score that represents an industry benchmark. You may or may not have these. If you don't have these, talk to us. Let's see what Valerie has in her big database of questions and answers and findings, recommendations, and industry benchmarks, and see if there's something that would fit or could possibly work with your survey. So the source is just going to tell you where these industry benchmarks came from. And in this case, it came from our East Bay Group consultancy. So that's why it says source East Bay Group expertise. But if you have a benchmark from someplace else, you can just say where this came from here. So step 6 is sort of the heart of the upload. And this is the step that we do recommend doing via Excel and not via the online forms. So it's not important that you understand the layout of this file on this call today. So we're not going to really go into that too much, but we have a template. It's basically going to be organized by category, question. Then we have our answers by audience, or the average aggregate score by audience. Then we have our findings, recommendations, and that's pretty much it. This category here called reason is representing the reason why they answered that way. And that's sort of what we consider to be a short title of the question. So just an abbreviated expression of what you asked and what it means. So step 7 is your opportunity to load verbatims. This is super self-explanatory for the most part, but of course we have a template for it. And you can title your pages. So if you have 5 pages of verbatims, each one can have a different title, maybe representing a different set of questions or a different value proposition or category. The theme will be an expression of how that verbatim looks as a visual. So in this case, I had a style called roadway. And then if you look at the verbatim, if I click view on verbatim, it looks like a roadway. So if I go back in here and I change the style, let's say I do something like ideas, click save, and then go to view verbatims, and now it looks different. So that's all that is. We have some out-of-the-box representations of verbatims. And you don't need to, you can use any of these components without having a full survey. So if you just really like this verbatims capability, you can use this by itself, just so you know. So that's step 7. And then step 8 is optional. This is just if you want to add a new finding or recommendation for a question, like you didn't get it right the first time or something new came up, you want to add it later. I don't use this ever. I try to work with the file, and just if I need to upload a file, if I need to re-upload a file, I'll just re-upload the whole thing. And then step 9 is our Freeform graphing tool, where we can create any type of graph. We have up to 6 graphing categories available, and you can put whatever you want in here, anything that can express whatever you need to express that wasn't covered through the survey results. So that basically covers step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we can help you with this. This is not something you need to go do on your own. I think the key takeaway here, key takeaways are, number 1, play around with it if you would like to. Number 2, you can use any of the components separately. Number 3, if you would like to look at our survey, our database of questions, and maybe complement what you're already doing, we'd be happy to do that. Or if you want to use some of our entire surveys, you can do that. The other thing is too, if you think you like this and you want to pull in survey results, maybe let us take a look at helping you design the survey from the very beginning so that it's really easy to load back into SuiteCX when you're done. We can help you with that. So this is not super important. This is just a good way for you to think about different ways you can commonize your scale. So this is just basically if you have scores on a scale of 1 to 10, you could potentially do some division to proportion that out to get yourself down to a number that fits into a 0 to 4 scale or a 0 to 3 scale. And if your scale is a percentage, you can just turn it into a number. So if you have a percentage of 83%, that's really just the number 83 on a scale of 100. So you could do 83 divided by 100 times 4 equals 3.2. So just a little bit of engineering suggestions. And honestly, I never have this conversation with people, so I don't think it's super important. But if you're thinking about how do you commonize the scale, we have all kinds of different ways you can do that. So let me take you off mute and see where everyone is. Thoughts, questions?
I have a question. Do you see my question?
Let's see. Oh, okay. Surveys, multiple choice, open end. Is there any way to link the data VOC graph at verbatims? You know, the way that we link the data is through our findings and recommendations, because the survey results are really just something that you view. So if we go back to our demo project, so my survey results are really going to show up in this chart. Anything that fits on a common scale with a question and answer is going to fit on, is going to look up, show up here. Verbatims are kind of standalone. They're in their own place. And the Freeform graphing tool is the same. It's kind of in its own place. So everything that we load into the survey as a finding and recommendation, those findings and recommendations are the things that actually pull forward into our planning tools. So what you might want to do, if you have verbatims that really are findings and recommendations, we can load them as verbatims, but we can also load them as findings and recommendations. You can even make a category for it called verbatims or customer verbatims, and then we can load them there. That way you can make sure that they pull through. Same thing I would do with the graphing tool. If there's anything in here that really belongs, that really needs to go forward as part of planning, then we can not only show it as a graph, but we can also load it as its own sort of category for findings and recommendations. Because the survey views are interesting, but they stay here. The findings and recommendations are the things that feed into our roadmaps and our prioritization and all that.
Gotcha. I have a follow-up question then, and part of this is just not fully kind of using the tool yet and knowing how the parts integrate. But to the extent that I assume or understand that part of a journey map will include some data findings, or even not just the ultimate findings, but maybe the data points, the data spread underpinning the finding. If there's a question that wasn't a scaled question, that is, you know, multiple choice or something like that, where the results, we would want to integrate them into a map as an underpinning. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a multiple choice, you can even convert it and load it into the survey results as like a 0-1 kind of thing.
Okay.
So you can use that same scale, just make it a 0-1. That was kind of the super boring part that I skipped, because for me it's boring, but it's just the engineering of the numbers. We can pretty much get anything into a common scale by just doing some division, multiplying, or just sort of saying that maybe a true false is a 0-1. So there's that. We can do that. And then the other option is, you were talking about the metrics and the scores that go underneath the interaction point. Now those are going to kind of live in a different place. So let me go to, let's go to our inventory. So let's see if we have, if we click on an eye point and we have scores and metrics. Okay, so this eye point does have a couple scores. We have at least some customer scores here. we have an MPS, a CSAT, and a CEM. So these scores aren't going to really be part of your survey module. This is going to be independent of your survey module. And these scores, yeah, and these really won't pull forward into findings and recommendations either unless you do this. This is how you would do it. So if we know, let's think what would be a good finding and recommendation for this. Okay, so let's go to this interaction point and make a category for this, and maybe we make the category would be pricing conversation score or scores. And maybe the finding is we are scoring a 2 on our customer scores. And then maybe our recommendation would be this needs improvement. Let's brainstorm. And that's a pretty lame recommendation, but that's because we're just sort of testing the capability. And let's say this is really important. So I'll make it a 4, then click save. Now, when I go to my findings and I go to the end here, I just created a new category called pricing conversation scores. And I gave it a score of 4. And now it's showing we are scoring a 2 on our customer score. So I basically just stuck it in here. So now when I go to my recommendations, go to the last page, let's see where it went. It'll always put the iPoint Rex at the bottom. Here it is. So this needs improvement. Let's brainstorm. It's not a super awesome recommendation. It's kind of lame, but we're just learning how to connect your scores to findings and recommendations. And now because you did that, you're actually going to have an opportunity to prioritize it. So when I go into the prioritization module, which we haven't really taught on yet, but I will in a second anyway, this is too long. I hate having this much test data, but it will be here. Let's find it. It's see if it's in alphabetical order or if it's in I think I have too much data here. Okay. Looks like it showed up here as pricing conversation. Oh, that's the old one. I know why. That's my fault. I didn't refresh. Okay, so now let me go back here. Because I made that update, I have to click automate results from existing recommendations. So let me do that. This is going to overwrite everything we have. That's okay. Now I can prioritize. And this is a totally overloaded sample data set, which makes it hard to navigate, but now it's here. So it was something new, and so I had to rerun this report, but now it's a task. So now I have a new task, pricing conversation scores. This needs improvement. Let's brainstorm. Now I can actually prioritize it and turn it into a project. So it'll show up in the roadmap. I can attach ROI to it. I can treat it like it's important. So that would be a good way to take your iPoint scores and pull them into findings and recommendations. So if you're looking at this and maybe you don't intend to pull in any survey results at all, then I would just totally focus on your interaction point findings and recommendations and work on those. Then you'll have a full data set that you can work with prioritizing, and then you can use all the planning features.
Got it. Thank you.
Good question. You're welcome. How's everyone else doing on the call? I saw we lost a bunch of people. I hope it wasn't too Excel spreadsheety.
We're good?
Cool. Okay. Yeah, this is our most advanced stuff. It's not hard. It's just maybe thinking about things a little bit differently. So this is going to be a little section on how to read the results of the survey. And let me see here if I want to make this big or not. Sometimes when I click on this, it doesn't go away. Okay, so let's see if it'll go away. Okay, let me do this. Okay, So this is just sort of a zoomed in breakdown of all the different pieces that are on this survey result so that you can kind of see what we're looking at. So all of this is accessible through VOC, VOE, and VOI in your upper navigation. The first thing that you're looking at, the thing that's labeled 1, is our diagnostic titles, which are our categories. Number 2 is the comparative bar graph. So this is going to be your industry benchmark. 3 is the survey output. So this is the aggregate average of all questions in a category across all audiences. That would be 3. 4 is the range used in your survey. So this is just going to be your survey scale. This will be on the right. It'll tell you what your range was. And then the heat map is relative to the score and score range. So all that means is that we created a color scheme just like we do with everything else, and we color the scores depending on whether they scored low or whether they scored high. That's all that is. The questions, number 6, so the questions will show up in the right next to the average aggregate score. And this is really a shortened version of the question. We abbreviate the question when we do our file upload so that we don't type out the entire question. It's sort of like, you know, the summary short version of the question. Then we have our average aggregate score per question, so next to each question. And then we have our average score for the entire category, so that would be this number here. That's sort of right by the title of the audience. So you see industry benchmark has a score of average score of 3.5. That's what that is. And then 9 is our bar graph labels for user questions. This is just how we labeled the question or who the audience was for the question. And then 10 is our industry benchmark, which we pretty much always label as IB. So
is it hard to remove that industry benchmark from the results? It's just not something we talk about or use as a standard sort of data point for like every survey question we would ask.
Right.
Or, you know, the majority even.
Yep.
So can we get that
Let
out?
me go to that step. Benchmark. Let me see if it's optional or I think we can probably get rid of it. I'm not sure if it might be, no, it's required. Enter comparison benchmarks required. Require step 1 and 2 to be completed. Okay, so it requires step 1 and 2 to be completed, but I'm not sure if you have to have an industry benchmark. Let me fiddle with that offline by changing our sample data set. And then when we come, we'll let you know what you can do with that.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Because it seems like it's, the way this is designed, it's kind of a forced part of like every question, and it's not.
It is. That's probably because that's how East Bay Group does their surveys, and this was originally designed to support their consultancy. So that might be one of those things we can just turn off. Okay. So let's find out about that. That's a good question. No one's ever asked that question before. Verbatims. So verbatims are easy. I don't think we need to talk too much about those. What I like to do with verbatims is I like to just pull them into my PowerPoint. So if I'm putting together like a presentation and I've got survey results and I've got journey maps and I've got findings and recommendations, I just like to export this as part of the presentation at the end. You can also get these into your journey maps through one of our embed features. So that's another cool thing you could do.
Is that just for the verbatim, those visuals?
You could do that with anything. So like we have this feature where you can embed images into some of your maps. So let me see if I can find a good example.
I mean, the sheet of different kind of designs, were those examples of verbatim output?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So these, if I zoom in a little, these are the ones that we have already formatted out of the box. So we have women, we have the road, we have the SuiteCX sort of template, we have a puzzle, ideas, business, etc. We could probably design new ones too. You guys are on your own instance, so that would be easy. You can treat these as their own sort of journey maps. I mean, they really can be kind of their own thing, you know.
Right.
And they are nice to incorporate into maps. So if I go to like a hybrid map where we tend to do a lot of embeds, where we use a lot of images, let me just click on one to give you an idea. So I'm using imagery across the top on this map, but this same capability would allow me to embed a set of verbatim. So for each of these life cycle phases, if I had verbatim maps or verbatims loaded, then this would be a good place to load something like that.
Got it.
And it can be anywhere on the map. It doesn't have to be at the top. You could do it down here. You could do it for like thinking. The graph tool, so this is just a freeform graphing tool. You can create 1 to 6 graphs about any subject you want, totally open-ended. Just play around with that on your own in your playground. The maturity model, I've shown this to high-level executives who hated it, so it's not necessarily the right thing to show. This is like just kind of regurgitating the results. So is it really smart, and can you look at it at a glance and draw insights from it? Not necessarily. So it's just a simple mathematical result of what happened in your survey. The thing that's probably the most obvious is over here on the left. You can see your audiences and how you compare to your industry benchmark, and this is like across everything. And then over here, the color gradient kind of helps you see how you're trending with your scores. But other than that, you know, help us redesign this. If you have a better idea, we're totally open to that. I think with all the good result data we have, we can do something more interesting. We just haven't had anyone really working with it or beating it up. So understanding findings. Findings are a standalone module in SuiteCX. So we talked about how our findings come through our survey results, but we can also load findings up directly into the tool without pulling through our surveys. So if you don't want to pull in any surveys at all, you can just skip that part and you can still have all your findings. And I like to do it through my interaction points because I feel like that's the most connected piece. If we're doing journey mapping, we have interaction points, we have a story, we have scores, we have metrics, we have information that we can use to generate findings. And the same with recommendations. So either through surveys or through interaction points is the best way to load these. And this is all no big deal. We do have a findings or recommendations heat map, which is also not super intuitive or informative. So this is just going to show you kind of where your findings are. And this is, again, totally dependent on loading up scores and industry benchmarks. So don't worry about this. If we're not going to be using those pieces, it doesn't matter. Okay, so findings embedded in iPoints. This is probably the most useful way to connect everything if you're not working in surveys. If you are working in surveys, this will just be in addition to. So you can have both. And again, the way that you get to that is by clicking into any iPoint. It doesn't have to just be in your inventory. It can be on any map in your tool, in your project. You just click on the iPoint, and then you'll have access to the findings and recommendations. You can create a category, write the finding, the recommendation, and the score. And then findings categories. We've changed this capability now. We allow for categories in iPoints. Before we didn't do that, and then they would all get mushed together under one category, and that makes it really hard to prioritize. So don't worry about that. We have a category now for every iPoint finding and recommendation. So just make sure that you use it and you come up with a category that makes sense. Okay, so now this is my favorite part of the tool. I think aside from the journey mapping piece, is what you do with your findings and recommendations. I think this is super useful. And I think this helps customer experience strategists who aren't always able to clearly articulate projects that need to be executed based on all the good research and findings and journey mapping work that we've been doing. So this is a really nice way to bridge the gap between strategy and execution. And usually that's like a whole different department of the company. So what we have here is our planning wizard. And I will show you, we played around with it a little bit earlier, but the way you get to this is by clicking on prioritize. Now, if I've been working in the tool and I've loaded some findings and recommendations into my interaction points or I've loaded some in through my survey results, then the best thing for me to do would be to click automate. And what that does is pull through everything I've loaded into a great big prioritization report. And we did that already just a few minutes ago, so I already have all that data there. Now, the second way you can work is I can download everything I've loaded in my project for findings and recommendations, and then I can modify it offline, make changes to it. I can delete things, make it simple, make it small, do sort of a first pass at changing it, and then I can upload it again, and then I can pull that through to prioritize. Then the third way is for those who aren't going to be loading survey results into SuiteCX and who maybe didn't load any findings or recommendations into iPoints, but maybe you did have a really useful workshop with your team, and now you have a list of initiatives that you have to pull forward and create a roadmap from. If that's the case, you can just download a template and you can work completely on your own and load up all your initiatives separately, totally unconnected or not even related at all to findings or recommendations. So we do have that flexibility, and I have used this work on your own feature with a number of clients, and it works really well. So once I decide how I'm going to work, then I click prioritize initiatives, and this will take me to a impact and feasibility assessment. So what I have here is I have my recommendation category and every recommendation associated with that category based on whatever logic I use to get it here. Either I did a workshop, or I pulled it through my survey results, or I loaded it into my interaction points. Doesn't matter. It all works the same. Then I get to do an impact to the customer. So I'm going to say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 3, how does this impact my customer? Maybe this is high, so it's a 3. What's my impact to the company? Maybe that's a 2. Feasibility to implement, is it hard or easy? That's why at some point we want to be more specific with our recommendations so that we actually can do a feasibility and a cost assessment. So maybe this is moderate, and maybe the cost is very costly. So I just gave this set of initiatives a score. And then I can maybe move on to another one. Maybe I'll skip this one and do sales. So let's do sales. Let's say this is impact to customer is high. Impact to company is also high. Feasibility is easy. Cost is modest. When you've scored a category, it'll give you a check mark so that you know that you've done it. And it'll also give you a total of the scores you gave. So for impact, you had 2 impact categories here. You scored a 3 and a 2 for a total of 5. For feasibility, you had 2 feasibility categories and your total score was 3. And that gives you a total score of 8. So I'll do one more just so we can see it. So let's do loyalty, impact to customer high, impact to company high, feasibility, let's say this one is moderate, and cost is costly. Now that I've scored those 3, I can click on initiatives, and then these 3 that I scored will be in my 2x2 grid as do now, do next, next year, or fit in. It'll list everything else that I have because everything else is in my initiatives grid, but I haven't scored it yet. So this is the opportunity to do a couple things. Number 1, you can look at what you've got and review it with your team. Number 2, you can actually do the scoring here by just dragging the initiatives. If I drag an initiative it'll highlight the initiative that I dragged so that I know what I did. This is kind of a harder way to do it because you're not really seeing all the detail around the initiatives, whereas on the prior screen you are. You can also move things. You can say, well, we voted this as important to do now, but some other people in the team think it kind of belongs over here, so you can move it. And then any changes that you make will actually update the scores for feasibility and impact right here on the screen. And then when you're done, you can download all this data and you can have it in Excel. Now from here, if you click on roadmap, you're going to have a roadmap. So only the initiatives that we scored will show up in the roadmap. And then from here, I can change my do now, do next, do later, fit in. Maybe this is more appropriately described as first quarter, and maybe this is second quarter.
Screen is so behind. Oh. Do you want to sit beside me with that? What are you showing? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm still on that.
Are you guys having a delay?
Well, Sherry's not, but I am.
Oh.
I'm sure on the same, we're both using Wi-Fi. It's weird.
Oh, that is weird. Yeah, I can see GoTo gives me like an audience view, and I can see usually where you guys are, and there is a delay, but it's not super long. It's like 1 or 2 seconds.
I'm still on the prioritized grid is showing for me.
Okay, well I just went back to it. So you're so.
But it never left.
Oh, okay. So it never went to roadmap. Well, at least someone else there can see where I'm going, so you guys don't think I'm crazy over here. So now what I did is I went back to my 2x2 so that you can see how it retroactively updates the header on your 2x2. So I changed it from do now, do next, do later, fit in to first quarter, second quarter, third quarter next year. So whatever you want to do. Also in the roadmap, each initiative becomes a project charter. So when I click on the initiative, it'll give me an opportunity to add a description, dependencies, benefits, resources, notes, and cost. And it will come with a duration already, and it'll bring forward your impact and feasibility scores. So this could be filled out and then exported or dropped into PowerPoint or handed to your project management office and say, this is what we believe should be our next priority. Let's work together to get approval to execute. If you want to change the duration, you can just move around on your roadmap and dynamically expand the project. So I just took it from 3 months to 6 months. And I also have the opportunity here to make changes to when things happen. And I can say, well, this happens right behind this one, and maybe this one actually needs to move here. So you can still continue to evolve and change your roadmap even at this point in the process. So this part is pretty simple. I think the only part that's a little tricky is working with our survey upload module and commonizing your survey skills, but we can help you do that. That's not anything I would worry about trying to figure out how to do yourself. Opportunities are leveraging some of our questions and answers, or just maybe taking a couple of them that might help complement the work you're already doing. Other opportunities are letting us work with you before you execute a survey so that it's like perfectly designed to load into SuiteCX when it's done. And then the rest of the modules here regarding planning, just remember a key takeaway is that you can upload your initiatives completely separately from survey results. So keep in mind, if you have something coming up where you're going to be doing a planning session for, I don't know, 2018 has probably already been planned, but maybe it hasn't, or maybe there's some changes that need to be made. Think about ways you could start to document what's coming, what's important, what your portfolio looks like, and then we can load that in here totally separately. And then we can do impact and feasibility assessment on it. And also remember that your interaction points are really good places to put findings and recommendations, especially if you want to connect it to a metric or a score that you've loaded against that interaction point. Mm-hmm. And thus concludes your 102 course.
I have a quick question. If you're linking a data point to an embedding some ratings or question results to an interaction point, when you think about mapping a journey map with several interaction points, especially something printed out, where would those insights live? Are they embedded or are they visual?
Good question. We have a couple different options. So we just created a new cool thing where you can, it looks like in my screen on the go-to, it looks like you can see this great big journey map. So let me know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we created is an opportunity to create a autograph in a map. So what I have here, and I had to zoom out just a little bit because I've got scores on the right, so I don't want you to totally lose what's on the right of the screen. But I have a journey map here, a really simple journey map with interaction points on it. And what you do is you score the interaction points. Now this only works for our customer scores or our company scores. So we have 6 scores that we put in the iPoints, 3 for company and 3 for customer. You don't have to use the exact scores that we use. We just kind of give you a suggestion here. So we've got like ROI, engage, effort. It's really just a suggestion. Use what makes sense for you. Now, when I score my interaction points using these customer or company scores, I can create an autograph just below it. So what I've done here is I've given these iPoints a CEM, CSAT, and NPS score. And because I did that, I got a graph in the very next line. So this is giving me, that information is now showing up automatically just below those interaction points. And then we also have a legend that shows up on the right that will give you a summary of how your interaction points are trending across these 3 customer scores that I chose. I could have done also a graph for company scores. In this example, I pulled through just customer. Now, it's going to count the scores against all the interaction points in this map. So because I have interaction points up here, it'll kind of look like I don't have a full set of scores. But if I wanted to, I could have not use the interaction points up here. I could have only used the ones down here and then given them all a score, and then it'll show you kind of how you're trending across the interaction points that you did score. And it'll always give you this graph at the bottom automatically.
Yeah. So you're saying that which line does not reflect all of the points, or you're saying, I didn't follow kind of what you just said about a line maybe reflecting some of the points versus all of the points.
Oh, about how, let me see, hold on a second. So you're talking about how over here on the right, it tells you that your CEM score is 56 of 81. Now, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. Oh, that is okay. That's cool. Okay, so what this is, by the way, this is a brand new feature. We just launched this like 2-3 weeks ago, and no one's used it yet except for us. But what this is saying is, I lied about what I said earlier. These interaction points don't matter. The graph is only tracking the interaction points that are on the journey map here because this journey map and this graph go together. So since you have 9 interaction points here and the total possible score you could have for your CEM score is 9 times 9, which is 81, since what it did is it added up the way I did score them, and it's telling me that I scored a 56 of 81.
Got it.
And that's how it's doing for all of them. So it's not taking into consideration the other interaction points on the map. It's only taking into consideration the ones that you put on this graph. So that's cool. That's good.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes.
When I got confused, yes.
Yes. So we haven't actually started training on this yet. We will probably soon. We're about to do a pretty big upgrade to our UX and to some of our key screens. So when we do that, this is going to be kind of launched, and then I'll add this into the training curriculum. But for now, it's been really just us playing around with it. We like it. We think it's going to be cool. And we
Oh
started.
no, that's cute. I think
You
that you
like
don't
it?
have to. Yeah, because depending, I think it kind of dovetails on my questions about the survey. It just having to go through all those steps and force maybe something that doesn't fit as well versus this approach can be helpful in terms of displaying data
Yeah, I think
points.
so too. Because most of our scores and metrics have been buried in the I point. So generally, like if you were to look at, so these are our scores. So we've found a way to pull our scores out and show them visually on journey maps. But our metrics, which are still really important, all this website stuff and social email or social media, email performance, call center, all this metric data, this is still going to be buried behind the I point. So the best way to pull this out is to either create a finding and recommendation that highlights something related to a metric, like say, because we're getting a, 95% opt-out rate, we are going to rework this project. That's a good way to pull a metric into a finding and recommendation. But other than that,
Got it.
it's kind of buried back here. Now that will come out if you ever do an Excel export from the map. Whoops. If I'm on this map and I do download data and statistics to Excel, that I can pull that all out. And then we also have a pretty simple statistics view, which is just simply a summary of what's going on your journey map. And it just pulls out the scores you've given, the emotional state that you've appended to your interaction points, some of the really high level popular information, like whether the interaction point is planned or unplanned, and any pain points or moments of truth that you've tagged against the map. So we have this also. This is another way to pull forward, but this is really going to just show you the top level, most popular information. It's not going to drill you down into those lower level metrics.
What would you call this functionality or this view that includes what we just talked about? That, and you were saying that this is something that you're still playing around with internally. Just because, like next week when you guys are here, if we want to reference this, what would we call it?
This would be the autograph map. So it's a way to create graphs automatically. So we just call it autograph because the way it works in the tool is actually pretty cool. What you do is you select I'll show you the configuration on this map. So if we go to the way that I set up this map, and this is how all the hybrid maps work, and this is live now. I'm pretty sure we deployed it. So when we're putting together like a executive summary map and we're thinking of the different components that belong in the map and how we want to show our information, we added a new feature in here, and it's called customer story with graph. You can either do a large one or a small one. It depends on how many interaction points you have. And then we have company story with graph. You can do large or small. So in the case that I just showed you, I chose customer story with graph small. Now what's cool about that is all you have to do is make that selection, and it'll give you the journey map like it normally does, but then it'll automatically give you this graph below, and then the graph below just dynamically updates depending on the scores. So then you put your interaction points on the story the way you normally would, and then you just make sure you open them up and actually give them a score, and then this graph below just creates itself. Make sense?
Yeah.
I think we're going to be using this a lot. The trick that we have, the challenge that we have is people don't usually have scores. We try to encourage scoring because there are so many cool things you can do if you actually have some scoring information. So displaying it isn't usually the hard part. Usually the hard part is working with companies on making sure they have access to scores and that they start integrating them into the work.
You can convert percentages and, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yep. So you can start playing around with this now, or you can wait till we get there next week and we can start teaching you how to use it as part of our session.
Yeah. It'll be next week.
Okay. I know this week it's already Thursday. So that's our 102. This is the hardest stuff that we have. So if you didn't think it was that hard, then just be reassured you've just covered all the hard stuff. There's nothing harder than that. The only reason I think it's even hard is because you're commonizing scales and you're sort of backloading data into SuiteCX after you've already executed. Our best case scenario is we work with you before you execute, and then it's all set up. And then when you get the survey results back, we just load it right in. But other than that, it should be pretty easy. I like the opportunity to load initiatives and recommendations outside of having the survey. So remember, you don't need to have a survey. So those would be probably the key takeaways today. And then we'll go over some of this also in our in-person session with you guys. And for any of you on the phone who aren't with HD Supply and you need more information on this, or you would like to see our survey questions and answers, our database, or any of the things I mentioned today, then just reach out and then we can work with you as well.
All right.
Okay, well, we're
Thank
looking
you.
forward to seeing you.
Yes, look forward to seeing you too.
Okay, thanks everyone for coming today.
Bye.
Bye-bye.